Welcome to the Consultant's Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMann and Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth. And the Consultant's Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMann and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
Hey, welcome today. You have Dean McMann and Anthony Paluska, and we're very excited to invite Dan Sacchitella. Dan and I've known each other several years, I think. Dan may not admit that, and I represent that remark. But Dan is one of the most sophisticated creators of outcomes for clients. He has done so much with complicated solutions that have consulting and PS in them and products. I wanted to have him come on, or we wanted to have him come on and talk about that journey, talk about himself. Dan, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Anthony. Yes, it was a very generous introduction. I find myself just stumbling through these things and happening upon wins here and there. But my focus has always been around development of complex sales strategies that has started from simple instrumentation sales. And then I moved more into the complex software solutions where you have a more broad reach through a variety of industrial environments. And that has kind of segued into consulting in that aspect. So the combination of consulting for actually solving industrial problems versus consulting in the same vein on helping to develop business development or sales strategies to launch a new product or service.
Dan, and I forgot to mention that you also were in the military, and we want to thank you for your service.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Dean. Yes, I was in the Army for 9 years, fought in Afghanistan in 2008, and then when I went back to school, I decided to pursue schooling instead.
Well, we really appreciate that. And I just want to say the first time I got together with Dan, he took me to a place that had literally the strongest, it was a coffee that kind of specialized in military. Anyway, it was the strongest coffee I've literally ever had.
That sounds fantastic.
And he loves strong coffee, so.
Well, the beauty of that coffee is you can use it as weapons lubricant and degreaser as well as coffee. So it's really
manly, and I wasn't man enough. That's obvious.
Yep. So Dan, with your experience, and I know that kind of one of the key topics and you alluded to this a bit, is just this art of helping a client define its problems that are sometimes difficult for them to understand, articulate, figure out, whatever that is, right? Either they don't know it or they're not good at communicating what's at the root cause there, and driving them to, all right, how do we actually solve that problem and define a solution for you? So if we take that as a backdrop, right, so many clients don't know their true problem or can't effectively communicate it. How do you approach those situations? And let's just start at a high level of what do you feel your role is in that process, and how do you help guide them to better understanding what it is that they actually need help with?
Well, this can kind of come in a couple of forms. When you look at something strict, for example, you have a food and beverage customer. They're causing recipe errors, they have issues, and they think, okay, we're making recipe errors. We think that's our problem. But the problem is actually deeper than that. It has to do with the systems and infrastructure that are in place, that there's no amount of training or time that can be used to help get their people up to speed enough to not make these errors. Basically, they can no longer keep up with the pace of production and the pace of technology. And when either one of those things tends to fall behind, it's difficult to overcome that without going down to the root technical cause and then the cultural shift required to make that change. So if we were to talk about problem definition, I think Dean alluded to this a long time ago with me. You're like a corporate therapist, right? You're a corporate marriage counselor. You're in there with the different people, different stakeholders and parties trying to understand the problems, and you have to see them from the outside looking in, because when you're living in it day to day, you're putting out fires left and right. It's hard to see where the problems are. So with undefined problems, we go in and we clearly define them by approaching it from, let's learn about this business, let's learn about the parties and people involved, and then pick these little pieces apart and build a story with it. And that's how I generally approach these types of problems, because a lot of customers don't necessarily understand what the root cause actually is.
Yeah, they have a label, they have a reason they're in the discussion, and this is a question. But one, they clearly can't force for the trees, and this isn't a complaint against our clients in the world, but their art is not, hey, this is what's causing it. They're on, hey, I'm either feeling or experiencing something, or I don't even know I'm doing that, and you've brought a new idea to me. And I like the way you said we investigate until we can bring clarity to that. And therefore, that clarity should help motivate them to want to do something. Yeah, yeah, I like that. I like that. What of the different things you've done? You've been, as you said, you began selling, if you will, low tech, and moved through very complex, transformative technology and services that build, and now you're advising companies on their own journey. Which part of this have you enjoyed, or do you enjoy it all?
I enjoy all of it, and I enjoy the progression I've made. For example, you mentioned low tech. I sold temperature instrumentation. I would not want to necessarily go back to that. It was primarily in the refining industry. I try to stay out of refineries these days. It's not necessarily my wheelhouse anymore. But if I think back to a fundamental axiom of their types of problems that we are trying to solve, not sure how familiar you are with this, but when we make gasoline,
I have worked in refineries.
You have worked in refineries.
Yeah, I grew up in the refinery part of the country, and I did my summers working in refineries.
Well, there you go. So you know that gasoline, a lot of the fuels and tools that we use are made using exothermic reactions, catalytic bed exothermic reactions, and it generates heat. So in order to be able to properly monitor this and monitor for catalyst attrition, which is a thing that basically leads to hot spots in your reactor, you need really good temperature profiling and very accurate. If you don't, you can lead to an explosion. That actually happened at ExxonMobil in Baytown, Texas, back in 2012, I want to say, something around that time, where there was an explosion, and that set off a chain reaction throughout the industry and looking at how they're profiling these things. So if you think about when I went into a customer and said, hey, I have temperature instrumentation to sell, nobody cares. Said, hey, how comprehensive is your temperature profiling? Do you actually have a clear picture of what's happening inside these reactors? If you don't, it might be worth investigating. Let's look into that problem. That's how that conversation started. So it was low tech in effect, but we were solving complex problems that had a far-reaching impact across the organization because, generally speaking, explosion bad.
Explosion bad.
Yeah.
Explosion bad. I want to. Hey, Dan, if I don't get anything else written down today,
I think that's what we should call this episode.
Dan says
bad.
explosion bad. And we're going to take
I love the
that.
soundbite.
Dan,
I
did
love
you
the
ever
soundbite.
find as you're moving an organization that you've worked at to a more solution, more complex, lots more PS or consulting to really get the outcomes, that you were still stuck with maybe some executives that said, why can't we just sell the temperature gauges? I mean, why do we have to have all this other stuff to make it all work? Did you find a kind of a barrier to them really embracing and becoming the solution company they could come?
Sometimes. I saw that with certain divisions within the organization I was within. After I left temperature instrument selling, I went into full control systems. So if you think about it from human body, it's the brain's the operation, right? Moves everything, controls everything, monitors it all, and collects the data. That piece was always more solution focused and solution centric. But when you talk to a customer about it, they may say, hey, I need this system, this, that thing, and whatever. And sometimes you would be in a very good position to ask, well, why do you need that? People might say, oh, well, just go sell them this, sell them this, sell them this. It's like, but why? And if you do offer them something and they invest in it, the question becomes, are they going to maximize the use? Because it's a benefit to you as the vendor for them to obviously maximize their use. You getting that sale is one thing. You being able to repetitively go in, offer consulting, offer advice, and offer more insight into what they're doing, whether it's temperature, pressure, or control systems, no matter what you apply, you're going to be able to help them to that next level, which then again positions you as that trusted advisor, right? The more you can come in and assist them, the more you can make that service valuable to them, the more they're going to trust you to continue doing so in the future.
So you're, just to end on that before, sure. Your experience was, it kind of depended on my executive's experience, the freedom we had to drive it to be a more solution business. If they didn't have that experience or just didn't see it, they were, why are we asking them why instead of just selling it, right?
Exactly. And I've actually had instances where a certain leader had come from a different type of business and they had come to run a business that was maybe not in line with that solution or professional services focus. And they would offer their advice and then I would proceed to ignore it and go do what I thought was effective in selling and actually winning business.
I'm sorry, I ignore?
Yeah.
I think I've been the boss in companies where I've been ignored, and they probably did it to a good degree.
Well, sometimes it's about taking the best pieces of someone's guidance and then augmenting it a little bit, but also helping the people that gave it to you, help them think that it was their idea to begin with. That's
hear
how to
you.
effectively manage bosses.
Yeah, Anthony tries to do that with me all the time.
I hear you pushing back on that a little bit. I'm going to do it over here, and then I'll let you see how great of an idea you had to inspire me to do this.
That's right.
So just take that example where you had some of that resistance. You can still communicate and engage and own a key portion of that by talking to our clients about and solution selling to them, to put a generic term on it. But
a term we created that everybody uses wrong now.
No, it's generic.
Yeah.
But the actual execution and implementation of it, at some point, somebody else has to get involved within the organization that may or may not be bought into the same mindset or journey that you've just sold, but it's on the topic that we should be addressing. So help with that, right? We have you're selling a vision. You're selling an outcome.
Internal vision.
They have aspects of it, but we don't necessarily have those capabilities to deliver. How do you balance the risk of outselling the organization's willingness or capability to execute on something?
That's an interesting question. Outselling capability is obviously something you tend to avoid unless you can find good partners.
Well, perceived capability, the way they view themselves.
Perceived capability, yeah. But I think for us going out as sellers, it's incumbent upon us to truly understand what we're capable of across the broader organization. The more well-versed you are in your solutions, in your offerings, and the work you've done in the past that can basically be an example for the next set of customers, the better off you're going to be in making sure you can under-promise and over-deliver. That's really what it all comes down to. But when I think about trying to convince an executive of a certain path, or even the way you're messaging something, because I've shown this to you a couple of times, Dean, where I develop messaging based on a few key big ideas, under the premise that when people go into a presentation, they might remember 15% of it. I want that 15% to count. And if they believe that 15% is going to happen, which is going to lead to solving their problem, They will be compelled to take action. And to me, that goes both ways. I do that outside of the business to the prospective clients, or I have to do that internally to leadership, to people that I need to have support me from a budget perspective. That all comes into play. I'm selling inside just as much as I'm selling outside, but I approach it the same way, from a building it from the insights perspective, compelling action with stories and relatable information, and then giving examples of how that works, or even inviting them to come along and see it in action, right? And having the confidence to do that and to put yourself on display there in front of a client, saying, hey, come with me to this meeting. See how this is going to work.
How do you, as you think about building out some of these ideas and these stories for our clients, how much of that do you approach as, I'm going to build this for an industry because I'm an expert on the topics that they're focused on, versus how much of that is tailored to a specific client based on research and insights that you can glean about that client in advance of that conversation? How much, repeatability, I guess, is there in the idea itself?
Well, I mentioned kind of fundamental axioms in certain processes. Dean, being out there covered in oil and at his refinery job is going to tell you that there are certain physical principles and properties that are going to apply to any of these similar types of industries. So one refinery to the next is going to have a similar problem. But even though you may have similar problems across industries, and that can help inform before you go in what the possible solutions or outcomes are going to look like, it's still so important to go in with the right attitude and mindset, where you're fresh-faced and new, where you're coming in that learning phase. They're going to want some advice from you, and they're going to want you to push back, but not until they've been heard first. I think that's that difference. And it's a people thing. It's learning how to read your audience. It's how to gauge their body language, their tone, how they're receiving what you're saying, and then knowing when the right time is to come in and say, hey, so we've seen all this, we've investigated this. Now let's look at what we think will work.
Yeah. Making sure that although your point of view is predefined, making the communication and the process that the client goes through to experience that point of view, making it feel like it's collaborative and we are flexible in the way that we talk about and think about the solution, so that it's not I just pulled this off the shelf and I'm offering you this product, but instead I'm listening to you and I'm engaging with you, and we end up on a somewhat of a predefined track, but it does have some of the customization, the uniqueness tailored to that audience. That makes sense.
Absolutely. They have to know that they've been a part of that solution that you've built. They can't have been spoon-fed it. If they've been spoon-fed it, it's not gonna be as effective. You may not get the adoption. It may not be successful. But if they feel like they've been a part of that journey in developing this problem, you're on track.
Dan, I want you to give us a takeaway that you think you've learned from all this, but I do want to state that I've always been impressed that the organizations you work with may not have done the messaging for you and may not have corporate put you where you need to be. You've always just taken on yourself, I'll do the messaging, I'll figure it out, I'll get that client successful, and I really respect that. Give us a takeaway that you'd like us all to remember from your vast experience with complex solutions. I made you sound really old, Dan. I didn't mean to. There you go.
Well, I'm getting a little more.
Yeah, you're the same age as like my grandchildren, Dan. So go ahead.
Well, at the end of the day, B2B, B2C, whatever happens, we are still people interacting and selling and communicating to people, and people buy from people they trust. I mean, that's the tale's old as time, right? And if you started out with trying to understand the customer experience and you walk backwards to that solution, a la Steve Jobs, right? Say we have to start with the customer experience and work backwards from there. Always remember that people buy from people they trust. And if you start with the customer experience, you can't go wrong.
Great job, Dan. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you soon, Dan. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Take care.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Cheers.
You know what I really liked about Dan when I first got to know Dan was the thing I kind of left with. Dan worked for some, and I'll leave their name out, several big firms, And they did not create the messaging. They did not create the positioning. They did not create the things that would allow Dan to, they had the talent, but Dan to easily craft these multi-year journeys to change food and beverage. And he did that all himself. And he added videos he put online to tell the story. And he was like his own little marketing solution creation journey. And I just think that's so interesting that you could find people that unique.
Yeah, I mean, so many people live in organizations like that, and they feel victim to marketing hasn't provided me with this, and product hasn't provided me with this, and I'm not getting enough leads.
I'm not trained. I'm not this. And I'm not holding that against them. I'm just saying, here's a guy.
We should, as organizations, we should enable and support other people, but he's broken through the constraints.
What are all those people getting paid to do that in that company? I mean, they don't need them because Dan can do it himself. I just think that's really great. And I do enjoy Dan, and he's always but I like what he left us. People want to deal with people they trust and can solve their problems. Yeah. And that's for all the PS people who participate with us, all the consulting people, that this is really the key. Build those relationships, solve those problems.
Yeah, and I think his big piece that he really emphasized on the aspect of trust is bring them some value in the conversation at the early stages of it, and then take them on a journey of buy-in and understanding together.
And he does this naturally without any training.
Right,
ever.
So that when they come out the other side of the sales process with you, they believe that they participated in part of the solution and it's crafted, and they've got the confidence, like conversations we've been having even earlier today around, right, there's just this lack of trust and confidence in vendors or partners to deliver the outcomes that they're promising by going through the process like Dan illustrated. Yeah. I think you bring those buyers along and increase your chances of success.
And their chances of success.
Of course. So that was great. Thank you, Dan. If you guys like what you're hearing, please like, subscribe, and follow us on podcast and on YouTube channels. If you want to connect with Dean and I, you can check us out on LinkedIn. And if you've got any suggestions or comments or ideas for future guests, email us at podcast@consultantsway.com. We'll see you guys next time.
Yep. Follow us. Bye-bye.